Welcome to Shattered Reality with your hosts Kate Valentine and Fahrusha. Prepare to have your paradigms shifted and your truths questioned. And now, Shattered Reality.
Hello, people out there. This is Fahrusha, and I'm here with Shattered Reality Podcast. We have a great show for you today. And just to slate this whole thing, today is November 13th, 2018. And it's just the day after Veterans Day has been observed in this country. And it's a good day for continuing to honor our veterans. And our show will reflect that a little bit today. But first off, I want to tell everyone that has been asking about the return of Kate Valentine that she does want to return to the show, but due to circumstances beyond her control, she has not been able to make it. But she is okay, just for all those who were wondering about her health, etc. I've gotten a lot of questions. In addition, I wanted to say hi to a couple of our listeners. For starters, we have a very interesting gentleman from Finland who has contacted me with some interesting points of view. And I'm going to try to say his first name. It's either Göran or Göran. And since I am not able to speak the Finnish language, which is in itself not surprising, given that it is only related basically to certain Siberian languages and Hungarian, I don't know whether I should take the Scandinavian and Germanic route and call him Göran or Göran. But in any case, maybe he'll correct me and maybe he'll get back to me and have another few good words for Shattered Reality Podcast. The other listener that I wanted to mention today is David Millar from Fort Worth, Texas, who I've been corresponding with a little bit and also has some good ideas for the show. So allow me to say hi to both of those guys. And, they're tomorrow's men because they're listening to a woman talking, which is kind of rare out there. In any case, getting back to today's show, we have a very special guest who was on Shattered Reality quite a while ago in the first few shows that we had. And he had also been a guest on the Kate Valentine UFO show. I'm talking about Mack Maloney, who has written more than 50 books, including UFOs in Wartime, What They Didn't Want You to Know, and Beyond Area 51. Plus, he has written the best-selling Wingman military adventure series. He served as a consultant for a government-funded research firm working with the U.S. intelligence agencies, and he is a member of the rock band Sky Club. So we love musicians on the show because our wonderful audio engineer is also a marvelous musician. So welcome aboard, Mack Maloney.
Well, thanks for having me.
My pleasure entirely. So, given your background of writing so many books, and a lot of them are military adventures, were you a member of the U.S. military?
No, I never served in the military. I'm from a military family. My father was a World War II vet. I had uncles in the Korean War. My brother was in the Vietnam War. But I went to college, and I just am not the type of person to go along with the military life. I knew it just wasn't for me. I'd be in the brig in 2 weeks, that type of thing. So, but my hat's off to anyone who's done it. And in your opening, you said it just right. It's Veterans Day, or was Veterans Day, but you got to honor these people year round because they gave part of their life to protect our country. And what more can you do? You have to tell them, we'll never forget that.
Absolutely. And I was blown away. I was sitting at a desk of mine in Manhattan at 11:11 a.m. on Sunday, which was properly Armistice Day, and it was the 100th anniversary thereof. And when I realized that, it was 11/11, 11/11, 100 years later. And that sort of just blew me away mentally in a certain way.
Mm-hmm. Right. World War One is, I don't want to call it a forgotten war, but it's kind of World War II's shadow is really over World War One all the time because there was a bigger conflict and so on. But World War One was just awful. It was just an awful way to go about combat. It was the first war with machine guns and, really high explosives, cannons, poison gas, and, these soldiers living in these trenches with, just filled with rats and sewage and dead bodies around. And the only chance they get to get out of the trenches to charge into the machine guns. It's just a horrible, horrible war. And the people who fought it, especially the people who came back, I don't know how many are around these days. Probably not very many. But we have to remember them. We have to remember what they did. We can't forget what these people did.
We certainly shouldn't. And I will remember both of my grandfathers who served in the First World War.
Oh, yeah, wow.
And both came back, thank God. So moving right along, let's talk about your current latest book, Mack Maloney's Haunted Universe. Now that you've written more than 50 books, what exactly caused you to write this one? What was your impetus, let us say?
Well, I got offered a publishing contract. That's always, rule number one, never turn those down. And the other books that I've written are all fiction books, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show. Wingman is, a military fiction in the not so distant future type thing. So this is a nonfiction book, and the UFOs in Wartime and Beyond Area 51 were also nonfiction books. And I just spoke to the publisher. I had a lot of research lying around my office from the first two books, and for a while I was writing for Turner Broadcasting Systems webpage called Conspiratorium, where we would just come up with like 10 really crazy stories every month and put them on the webpage. And I did that for a couple of years, and I had a lot of research left over from that. So, as a way of cleaning my office, I just put it all, in a compilation, and they published it.
This is a question the book is great, by the way. I read it, and it's really extremely interesting. And I want to make compare it to Charles Fort, because the style of it is very much like the Charles Fort book, The Book of the Damned, and Lo. He had a spin-off from The Book of the Damned called L.O. ... And it also featured somewhat short accounts of very mysterious things that he had collected from newspapers and such. And so his methodology was not too different from yours in compiling this Haunted Universe book. And that, believe me, is a compliment, because there's even a term that's called after him, which of course is Fortiana, which everybody in paranormal circles uses.
Mm-hmm. Sure. These are the kind of books that I like to read, and growing up as a kid, I used to read a lot of Ripley's Believe It or Not. Used to come out in book form every once in a while.
Oh, yes. I read them too, Matt.
Right. And I just went through those, probably 3 or 4 times. This is as a kid. And I think too that I think there's more than 250 stories in the book, and as you say, most of them are only 2 or 3 paragraphs long, but it just the sheer number of them alone, in my mind, just tells you that we live in a very kind of strange reality. Strange stuff happens all the time, and when people see things that are extraordinary, they're not all hoaxes and they're not all delusional. They can't be. There's just too many stories about people seeing monsters, UFOs, ghosts, haunted battlefields, haunted planes, haunted ships. it happens just too often for them all to be not true. So just the sheer volume of the stories in the book, I think, by the time you get the end of it, you say, well, we really do live in a strange, reality.
Indeed, indeed. And what I would say about the hoax versus not hoax versus delusions, there are undoubtedly some hoaxes going on out there, particularly now with CGI and certain, say, UFO stuff that turns up on YouTube, and people claiming that they've been away for 15 years ago last night. And they only left yesterday morning, but 15 years happened in the interim. And, there are people just looking for publicity.
Yeah.
On the other hand, this whole idea of delusions, I think, is oversold. Forgetting hoaxes, delusions, because people experience things and people's consciousness is different. And
Yes.
sometimes, like we've had a number of people here on the show who weren't really selling anything, but they were experiences of purported UFO sightings. And could I tell you exactly what really happened? No, I can't. But what I can tell you is these people absolutely positively believe that something happened to them, and I do believe it did. And something happened. Whether their perception of what happened is exactly what happened, well, it's not for me to say.
That's right. I mean, when we talk about, we have our own weekly show, Mack Maloney Military X-Files show, and we talk about this subject a lot. In one part of it is, do UFOs or do certain people have paranormal experiences more than others? Or what I'm saying is, are certain people almost selected in a way to be more open to a paranormal experience? Like for myself, I've never seen a UFO. I've never seen a ghost. I've had little minor things, that I know that other people have, experienced. But I know people, and I believe them, who have seen like more than 2 or 3 UFOs. I know pilots. We have pilots on our show all the time. One of our co-hosts is a pilot, and a military pilot. These guys see UFOs all the time. Now, are UFOs really little green men from Mars? Once again, you never know. We don't know where they're from. I don't believe anyone knows where they're from. I don't believe the government knows. I don't believe the military knows. I think they have more evidence that they exist. I know they do. They have film, video, eyewitnesses accounts, radar, and so on. But I don't believe that they know where UFOs come from. So we're all kind of in the same, the same soup, wondering what's going on. But the thing is that why is it that some people just seem to, I don't want to say they attract paranormal experiences, but, I don't know how else to put it. And then some people definitely do not. And I put myself in that category.
Well, I've seen a couple of things that I'd have to classify as UFOs, and I've had many, many, many paranormal experiences myself. But then again, that's my stock and trade. I do psychic readings for a living, so there you have it. But on the other hand, I do think that there are certain characteristics of an individual which makes them slightly more likely to have a paranormal experience of some sort. First of all, being in the arts as often is something that is opening to other ways of thinking, let us say.
Yes.
And being an open person, not having made every decision about everything themselves, sort of being open-minded that other things might be true that you don't know about or see. Just being open, I think, is a big part of it.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And people that I've talked to over the years since writing UFOs in wartime, and I've been kind of in the UFO community, I can tell, as you say, there are some people out there who are just, hate to say it, but they're just like making it up, they're just making it up and to sell a book or to go on a lecture circuit and so on. But I have a feeling now, after being in, the biz for a few years, is that I think I can tell pretty much when someone is telling the truth when they talk about their UFO encounter, because, they have details in them just from an anecdotal point of view. There are details in them that even the most the best storyteller could not put in there. Later on tonight, we're going to do a show with a guy. He's been on before. He had a really graphic UFO sighting in Georgia 20 years ago. He was on his way to the Dairy Queen. So we call it the Dairy Queen UFO sighting. He was on his way to the Dairy Queen and saw a UFO hovering over this housing development that was under construction. He went right up to it. Now, this guy's a physicist, and he taught physics for a long time. He's now retired. And, he saw it. He could feel the heat from it. And, he was looking at it from a scientific point of view, and then, boom, it was gone. There's no way that just talking to this guy and hearing, what happened to him, there's no way he's making it up. There's no way that didn't happen to him. Those are the people, I'm interested in.
Absolutely. And ourselves included, we are interested in those sort of experiencers, people of very good or impeccable credentials, people who are willing to come out with it, because I think a lot more people have experienced UFOs than are willing to admit to it, particularly if they are in sensitive positions of trust, and they feel that admitting to having seen a UFO, even if it's not a close encounter of the third kind with actual beings from inside the UFO, I think that people are reticent to admit to it. So they say, whoever they are, but they say only 10% of UFO sightings get reported, if that.
Right. And you're correct on, especially with military veterans. Once again, we hear from them all the time. People who get in touch with us and they say, when I was serving back in 1982, I was out in the desert. We saw this thing. It wasn't anything of this earth, but our commanding officer told everyone, never talk about this or it's going to, ruin your military pension or whatever. We hear a lot from people who, I hate to use the word threatened, but they were told you have to keep quiet about this because of national security or whatever. If those people, this is, we petitioned on our show for this occasionally, to say to the Pentagon, give these people amnesty. Anyone who was told while they're in the service not to talk about a UFO sighting they had for security purposes, give those people amnesty. And can you imagine the tidal wave of research that we would get? We'd get thousands of more UFO sightings and more things to study, more things to look into, and kind of get us closer to solving the puzzle. So military veterans, a lot of them saw stuff, and to this day they just don't want to talk about it because of what they were told. Yes. Airline pilots are another case where they see them all the time, but they don't report them because, as you say, there's a ridicule factor. It's been around ever since UFOs, flying saucers, have been around, and they know when they go in for their promotion, if they're up against someone who has not reported UFO incident, he's going to get the job. He's going to get the promotion. So you keep quiet about it. And it's too bad it's like that, but that's the reality of it.
Well, that's true. And we know this from direct quotes from people who were at Rendlesham Forest during that incident back, I guess it was 1980. And they felt like their military career was disrupted through no fault of their own because they saw this very real sighting. We don't know what exactly it was, but it would seem that it was multiple witnesses, and it was not of this earth in the sense that it wasn't from any human government on the earth. I mean, some people talk about ultra-terrestrials and stuff like that, and I think it's all just conjecture. It could be right, but it is also conjecture. So let's get back a little bit to Mack Maloney's Haunted Universe and discuss a little bit what was your favorite account in the book.
Wow. Well, there's a number of most of the stories, as I say, are just 2 or 3 paragraphs long, but there are a few segments in there that we go on for several pages, and it's actually the last story in the book is about a place in Russia called the M Triangle.
That was my favorite too. Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah, that's just such a unusual, crazy place. Basically, it's a place in Russia near the Ural Mountains, and It's, I think, 40 square miles. It's just forest, trees, lakes, and streams, but it's really out in the middle of nowhere. So for years, the Soviet government would not let anyone in there, wouldn't let journalists or civilians into this place because it's always carried this kind of taboo about it. But then when things kind of softened there in the late 80s, they did let scientists and journalists go into this place, and they would go in on these expeditions for 2 weeks and camp out, basically. But some of the things they reported that they saw, I mean, UFOs were routine. The stars dancing around, the stars forming different, geometric shapes in the sky. Just beings not of this earth, glowing orbs that would come and sit right over their campsite, for a long periods of time. There's a place where you camp out in the woods or in the dense forest, yet you can hear traffic. You cannot make a phone call anywhere in this place except in this 3x3 square that they call the phone booth. For some reason, if you're standing in this square out in the middle of nowhere, you can make a phone call. Take one step out of it, you can't. It goes on and on and on and on. But a lot of people say that what happens is when they go in to the M Triangle, they come out, they feel different. Some people have been cured of, serious diseases. Most people come out for the better. They have their consciousness has been raised. Who knows, what it really is. But real quick, the story that stands out, what makes this my favorite story in the book, is that there was a gentleman, a Russian gentleman, who was washed out of the Soviet army. This is in the 80s now. Was bumming around, had no job. Finally caught on as a journalist in Moscow. They sent him to the M Triangle, and he went in with one of the first expeditions. It's really just, as I say, 2 weeks of camping out. But there was also a People magazine reporter in the same expedition. So she documented what was going on with this guy. Now, this guy was no Einstein. He was no genius. But when he left after 2 weeks, he went back to Moscow. He wrote his story, passed it in. And then all of a sudden he started getting a knowledge of astrophysics. And suddenly he was able to read math books and physics books and astrophysics books, something that had never even dawned on him before. And within 2 years, he was a cosmonaut.
Wow.
Cosmonaut. Okay, now what happened to him in there? What is going on in the M Triangle? And there's lots of stories about similar things like that. That's the most dramatic, but people's lives being changed simply by being in this place. That's got to be my favorite story.
Indeed. And the only thing I can compare that to is that sometimes people who have a near-death experience will come back from that knowing stuff that they didn't know prior to that.
Right, sure. Yeah. And a lot of people say now that things have gone the other way in Russia, now they're closing this place down, and the security services have always been watching this place, but they're not. They don't have the access that they used to. But the Russian military closely watches this place. So do the security services. What used to be the KGB, and people have asked why this place, and there's all kinds of rumors. There's uranium in the ground, and it used to be a place where they made batteries that were radioactive. But there's no proof of any of this. The outstanding evidence, the piles of evidence, is just how people change when they go to this place for a couple of weeks.
Interesting. I hope that there are more scientific studies done on this place. Have you yourself thought of visiting it, Mack?
Well, yeah, I'd love to go. It would have been easier to do, I'd say, about 10 years ago. When things were just a little bit better between the U.S. and Russia. Now, I don't think they're going to they don't let Russian journalists in, so they're probably not going to let an American journalist in. But hey, you never know. Never say never, right?
Yeah. I was over to what was the former Soviet Union about a year before Glasnost, and it was a bizarre place overall, taking a group of people through what is now Russia and the Ukraine, and being followed everywhere we went by the KGB.
Sure.
It was quite an experience even back then. But the way the fire goes inside this triangle, you had said that there was situations where even a small flame can suddenly explode.
Right. Yep. And sometimes I think the odd thing about it is, all right, the many odd things about it is that it almost seems like an area where everything is kind of compressed, just compressed, and all the crazy stuff that goes on around us seems to be more concentrated. People call them the hot spots, but this is the hot spot beyond hot spots. I mean, no one has ever, documented so many strange things happening. And when I say UFOs are routine, I mean they're literally routine. And people running into creatures not of this earth, and then the animals and the fish coming right up to people, having no fear of humans. Where does that happen? So I don't know. Now that you've mentioned, I think I would like to go over there.
Yeah, I think that beneath the surface of Mack Maloney lies a strong desire to become a more hands-on researcher.
Well, my problem is, I shouldn't admit it here, but I don't like to fly. That holds me back from doing a lot of things, to tell you the truth. But if the goal is worthy enough, I would just self-medicate and get on the plane.
Okay. Well, planes are pretty safe these days, but there
No,
can always be a problem. Which I was going to go in a little bit later in the show to ask you about what you thought about some of these things that are seen over the U.S. being actually craft that are being tested by the government.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of what people see, that's exactly what they are. There's a lot of, especially in the western part of the country, in the western deserts. At Area 51, Area 51 is exactly what the government tells us it is. Okay, it's a place where they test our top secret, newly designed combat aircraft of the future. That's what it is, in spycraft. But they have so many different things going on out there. For instance, for every stealth fighter, for every stealth bomber that they reveal to us, there's probably 8 or 9 variations of it that are at the prototype stage, or they are ones that they're not going to reveal to us. There's a lot of activity going on out there, and if you're, you can't get within 40 miles of it now, but if you watch what's going on, in the skies over Area 51, people see things that, yes, they don't look like they should be happening, but we have maybe hypersonic airplanes, some airplanes that might go 5,000, 6,000 miles an hour. Unbelievable, aircraft that could just be unbelievably maneuverable. And you're seeing just lights in the sky go all over the place. Well, maybe that's somebody, in a plane that has out of the envelope type of maneuverability.
Sure.
They also, another thing they do there is that they take captured Russian and Chinese jet fighters, and they have American pilots fly them, and then our pilots fly against them. It's kind of like a mock duel, but it's a way that our pilots know, what a Russian MiG is going to do with this certain kind of this kind, high, low, turning, whatever. So they do that too, and that's obviously highly secret as well. So just a lot of secret aircraft studies, things that would probably blow our minds if we know now. But that's what a lot of people see out there now. But that's not all they see out there, obviously, because there's a difference from seeing things in the sky moving fast, moving strangely, and, a saucer-shaped craft coming down in your backyard. There's a difference between that. But I have to say, a lot of it does happen out in the western deserts. Either it's explained or unexplainable.
Well, some of the so-called portal areas, you've mentioned a few portal areas in the book, but some of the so-called portal areas exist in the West. Area 51, I don't consider a portal area. It seems to be someplace, as you say, which is like an airplane proving ground, as well as someplace where things may have been taken if a craft of unknown origin, in other words, not of the Earth's governments, might have been taken.
Mm-hmm. There are places out there, though, that, and this just goes back to my second book, which is Beyond Area 51, which is a book about, we just take all the secret bases like Area 51 around the world. We just give a little bit of a history of each one. And a lot of them, the vast majority of them do have kind of UFO histories attached to them. But there's a place about 100 miles, no, about 75 miles north of Area 51. That is much more secret than Area 51. It's a place called Tonopah Test Range, and it's about halfway between. It's about right in the middle of Nevada, and it's out in the middle of out in the desert. There's Tonopah. The city of Tonopah is about 2,000 people. The base itself is about 40 miles out in the desert, and they test stuff out there. Well, for instance, the stealth fighter flew out there for 10 years, and no one ever knew it. Okay, that's how tightly sealed this place is.
Wow.
For it to leave Nevada airspace, sometimes if they had to do some kind of test that would want them to fly longer or whatever, higher or further out, they had to get a presidential order to let it go into California airspace. This is how tightly wrapped this program is, right?
Mm-hmm.
You never hear about it. You never hear about Tonopah. And the strange thing about it, and we point out in this book, is that Tonopah, probably the most secret base in the United States, certainly for aircraft, has absolutely no UFO history, and that is, to me, that's very strange. That's almost like whatever UFOs are, they're actually avoiding this place because they're everywhere else, but they're not there.
That's interesting. They don't go there. All right.
They don't go there.
Can't.
And what's strange too about it is that it's this little town of Tonopah, which is about halfway between Reno and Vegas. It bills itself as the astronomers, the best place in the United States for astronomers to go. So there were people out there all the time, tour groups and stuff, with hundreds of telescopes and looking at the skies probably 365 days a year. But there's no UFO reports. Yet you just go down to Vegas, go 100 miles outside of this place, and I think Nevada is the fifth highest number of UFO sightings in the country. So very odd that they just don't go to this very, very secret place.
Yes, it is. And there are other unusual places that are portal areas in the West, like the Skinwalker Ranch, and which is in the Uinta Basin in Utah, and the area around in Arizona, Sedona, Arizona, where I, in fact, had some strange experiences, though not UFO experiences. It does seem as though what's underlying in the ground sometimes has an effect, like if it's a lot of quartz or granite or certain other stones seem to create electromagnetic effects that either incite some of these sightings, or else that makes maybe something that the beings inside the UFOs may be looking for that energy. I'm not sure.
There's a place, we have this in the book as well. There's a place called Askai Chin. Okay, it's in the very farthest western part of China, on the border with India, in the Himalayas. Okay, it's one of the most isolated places on Earth, and it's miles high into the elevation of the mountains. They're way up there. Snow all the time, brutal weather all the time. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, people might not be aware of this. The Chinese and the Indians fought a war over this place, Aksai Chin. All right, the most unbelievably unforgiving place, inhospitable place in the world. They literally fought a war while everyone's attention was focused on the Cuban Missile Crisis. These two countries are fighting each other over this place. Now, the strange thing about this place is, and then they stopped after 2 weeks. They stopped. The strange thing about this place is it has a long history of UFO sightings going back hundreds and hundreds of years. Not to say that's what they were fighting about, but it's a strange place to fight. So some researchers went up into this place afterwards, and they went into this one village. And this is an anecdote, but I've read it, I've seen it in several key areas of research, where they went to the kids and said, draw what you see every day. What do you see in a usual day? Now, these kids they barely had books. They had no TV, radio, nothing. So whatever they're going to draw is really something that happens to them. And 70% of them drew what you would say were flying saucers coming out of the mountains. And this is a place, as you say, it's like where the two pieces of the Earth's crust meet, and that's what formed the mountains.
Right.
And who knows what kind of, energy, who knows what's down there. But you just have this strange place out in the middle of nowhere, up in the Himalayas, with a lot of UFOs, in its history, and for some reason, Red China and India fight a war over it. back in 1962.
Was that the place, or is the largest city called Alta Atay? Is that the same location that I'm thinking of?
I'm not sure that it
Okay.
could be. I know that this is one of the least populated places on Earth.
Okay. Well, I haven't been to the Himalayas yet. I don't think I'm going to get there this time around, but it
You never know.
certainly is quite a remote location, and there are a lot of interesting spiritual groups that have called that area home, including the Dalai Lama. And
Sure.
prior to Tibetan Buddhism was, of course, the Bon tradition. Now, the Bon tradition, if you're familiar with it at all, it has a lot of absolutely out and out magical practices involved with the religion that are, undisguised. They do magic for themselves, against others, all kinds of different things, and have a lot of significance of dreams, similar to those of certain tribes in the South Pacific and in South America. I just throw that in. I don't know.
That's interesting. Wow.
You have some of your book is about spying and how we are being spied on today. Would you like to expand a little on that?
Sure. I mean, it's no secret that what we would term privacy just 30 years ago, it's no longer around, and it probably isn't going to come back. But the U.S. has a satellite called the Keyhole satellite, and it's orbiting somewhere around 125 miles up, and
Okay.
and it can look down on you, and the lens is so powerful that if you're carrying a pack of cigarettes in your pocket, it can tell the brand of cigarettes. It can count the buttons on your shirt.
Oh, jeez.
Now, here's the punchline. This thing has been up there flying since the 70s. This is now an old satellite that's probably been retired. Can you imagine what they have now?
This is frightening beyond belief, but the other side of that coin is something told to me by the daughter of a person who worked as a tactician for the government for many years and got very high into being a non-governmental governmental person, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
And she said to me that her dad's concern was that they were just collecting all of this data constantly through whatever form of spying, but nobody was keeping track of it. They had plenty of data, and they had a poor amount of analysts. The analysts were considering not so much the invasion of privacy, but the idea of the fact that some of the people out there anyway were trying to protect us from quote unquote the bad guys. And there are bad guys out there, no doubt.
Yep.
But she said that they had so much data, and the analysts, they didn't have enough analysts, and the analysts were poorly trained and so forth. And sadly, she basically, although her parents were out of it at that point, she sort of felt like the whole 9/11 thing was perhaps due to lack of analysis of data. I don't know.
Well, that could be. That's one reason. I mean, there is definitely a case where you can have too much intelligence, and it overwhelms you because, as you say, you don't have enough people to interpret it and to kind of put it into real time, let's say. To me, 9/11 was something that well, we don't want to get into conspiracy theories. It happened, and 4 planes crashed, and 2 planes took down the towers, and 1 crashed into the Pentagon, 1 crashed in a field. But there's a lot of evidence that some people knew, in the intelligence agencies and in the political, part of Washington, D.C. They knew something was going to happen, and it just seems that for some reason they sat on their hands at the wrong time. Who knows why?
Yeah, well, I guess we won't know that answer until maybe after we're long gone, you and I, Mac. It won't come out maybe. But more on just getting back for a second to the idea of collecting intel and
Hmm.
then being able to use it. Purportedly, I think that the governmental agencies may have improved upon the sorting of the intel through AI and the algorithm system kind of
Right.
thing, that they are able to, if you have a pack of Marlboros in your pocket, that won't come up on the algorithm.
No, but it might go to directly to Reynolds Tobacco to tell them that they spotted one of your customers. See, that's the danger too. Is years ago when people used to think Big Brother and they're going to know everything, they always thought that it was the government, and to a certain extent, it is the government. But the people we really have to fear, knowing all this stuff, are the commercial interests, the manufacturers, the people who are always trying to sell us something. We have a story in the book about how when Amazon starts delivering stuff by drone, one of the biggest problems is that they still have to iron out, if they ever do, is that these drones are going to have cameras on it, and they're going to see what kind of car you drive, what kind of lawn fertilizer you use, what kind of beach furniture you have, what kind of roof you have, and they will sell that information directly to the roofing companies, the beach furniture companies, and the car companies, and so on.
Absolutely.
Even now, these new cars are loaded with what we used to call black boxes, taking down every move that you make, and not just am I going fast, am I going slow. If you get in an accident, they can actually, turn the evidence against you and say that you were the one, who were driving recklessly. But what they're doing is every time you stop at a Quickie Mart, every time you pick up a six-pack of Budweiser and so on and so forth, they're going to take that information and sell it to Budweiser, and that's what advertisers have wanted forever, right? This is their heaven, okay, to know what the individual does with their day and what products do they buy, because we're all kind of routine people,
Absolutely.
And that's what you're giving up. That's what you're giving up.
Yes, and in terms of the cigarettes in your pocket, they may be reported to your health insurance company and
that.
your life insurance policy. So you find suddenly that your premiums are jacked up, type
Right.
of thing, and it really hits you in the pocketbook. And I'm sure you've had the experience of being online, having looked the day before for a new Phillips head screwdriver, and then you everywhere you look on your computer, you see advertisements for Phillips head screwdrivers or whatever you've looked at.
For the next 6 months, they keep
Absolutely.
popping up.
Long
They don't-
after you purchased one.
Right. And I think someone said too, the people who came up with that idea basically is if you do a search and then you just, move on, they know that if they keep bugging you, the chances are that 50% of those people will eventually buy the product, because you're interested in the first place because you clicked on it in the first place. So they know if they just keep bugging you and bugging you and bugging you, you say, oh yeah, I'm going to buy it, and boom, you click and you have it, and that's it. They got you. They got you. It used to be just telemarketers. I mean, there's still a lot of them around now, but they, at least you had the ability to hang up on them. These things are like annoying until you finally say, all right, enough already, I'll buy it.
Okay. Well, would you like to tell us a little bit about the very interesting incident that you wrote about on the Hobart Navy destroyer, the Australian Navy destroyer?
Right. Back in the late 60s in Vietnam, when the Vietnam War was really going, full throttle, there was, between South Vietnam and North Vietnam, there was this, what they called the demilitarized zone. And supposedly no troops were supposed to go in there as a way of keeping the two warring countries apart. But no one ever paid attention to it. And the North Vietnamese, the communist troops, they were always in there. They were always fighting in there. So it was just by name only. But it was just a way to demark the two countries. So they started getting reports in the summer of '68 that there was a lot of what they called enemy helicopters flying over the DMZ. Now, we know that was just they were using, a word a code word, because one thing about the North Vietnamese is that they never had helicopters during that entire war. We had thousands of helicopters. They had no helicopters. So there were no enemy helicopters. So this was just the name they were given to these lights in the sky that people didn't know, what they were. So this goes on for 2 or 3 nights, and finally the U.S. Air Force moves up north, lots of jet fighters and SAM missiles, anti-aircraft missiles. And one night, sure enough, all these lights appear in the sky. The jet fighters go up, and they start chasing these things. Now, the U.S. government, the military, before this had happened, they had asked any ships in the Gulf of Tonkin near the DMZ if you could just kind of be on the lookout, because there might be some action happening on this particular night. And one of these ships was the Australian destroyer, the Hobart. So now what happens is, we have our jet fighters chasing these UFOs. They fire on them. But what happens is the missiles, instead of hitting the UFOs, they hit the Hobart instead, and they kill 3 sailors, and they injure about 40 people.
Gosh.
It was just like chaos. In fact, the ships were firing back at our fighters. This is how chaotic this whole thing was. And then in the next morning, U.S. medevac helicopters went out, and they took off the wounded and the dead. The ship was a mess, and it sailed back to Australia. It was rebuilt. I don't think it ever went back to Vietnam, and it was eventually sunk as an artificial reef off of Australia. But the strange thing about this is that in the United States, they reported the story, but free of any UFO, connection. Mm-hmm. But in Australia, they talked about it quite openly. They said that this might have been happening and so on and so forth. At the time that the guy was the head of General John Brown, who was the head of the U.S. Air Force in Vietnam, he went on to be on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he even said during a speech, we used to see these things all the time. We used to call them enemy helicopters. And, one night, the Hobart was in, the wrong place at the wrong time.
Boy, oh boy. And all due to UFOs, but no one ever actually determined what these lights actually were. I mean, UFO in this case is clearly simply unidentified flying object and not necessarily alien craft.
No, but, they know what they weren't. They know that they weren't enemy helicopters, and, they weren't jet airplanes or anything. These were just something else, something else. And there's a lot of UFO reports, during the Vietnam War. This one is probably the most dramatic, but people are seeing stuff there all the time. In fact, that's the idea of my first book, UFOs in Wartime.
Yes.
They seem to show up more in wartime, we've talked about it before, than they do in peacetime.
Well, of course,
that was certainly the case in Vietnam.
Of course, the Foo Fighters were an early example of that, but in not prehistory, but in early ancient history, in certain battles in Greece, for instance, and other places in the ancient world, some of the things that were reported there were aerial fighters, which didn't exist to our knowledge at that time.
There's a story about Alexander the Great, and he was, in the process of conquering the known world. He was just about to invade India, and they were his army, which was this huge army with elephants, lots of horses, and cavalry and troops. And they were about to cross this river, and they would have scribes that would go along, that would follow the military train, let's say. They're like the historians. And one of them wrote down, we were attacked by arrows and shields, flying shields and arrows. So you think of it, okay, a flying shield looks a little bit like a flying saucer, and an arrow, would be like some kind of a missile or something. They were attacked, and it frightened the animals so much that they wouldn't go across the river. And as it turned out, in the long scheme of things, this kind of goofed up Alexander's plans. He had to go somewhere else to ford the river, and the idea of the momentum was lost, and so on. So yeah, you're right. I mean, way back throughout human history, just go into the Bible.
Yes, indeed. The Ezekiel's wheel, I believe it's called, right?
Yeah, you bet.
You had something very interesting from Turkey. I'm trying to think of the name of the battle. I'm running through the book.
Gallipoli.
What's that?
Gallipoli.
Gallipoli, yes. And I was myself in Gallipoli. So that really hit home for me, having visited the site and finding out after reading your book that a lot of people disappeared there. Why is this not more researched or brought out? Because it
I
seems
don't
to
know.
me it's egregious, you know.
Right. I mean, basically, the story is the thumbnail is that during World War One, and we were talking about World War One earlier, British Commonwealth troops. So that is British troops, New Zealand troops, and Australian troops, Indian troops, anyone else, anyone who was in like the British colonies, had this combined army. And what they were going to do is they wanted to invade Turkey. Turkey was an ally of Germany, and the British thought if we can get a foothold in Turkey, we can start attacking up from the south and just basically give Germany more headaches than it already had. But they didn't plan it out very well, and they landed all these guys on the beach. And the Turks were kind of in the hills and the mountains, and they just slaughtered them on the beach. I mean, we're talking about how World War One was a slaughter. This is no different. There's a great movie called Gallipoli that Mel Gibson is in as a young man, and it really graphically shows, just what a horrible situation this was. Anyway, so there was this British company, 100 soldiers, called the Sandringhams, and they were named after an estate, a large estate in the UK. And basically, what they were is they were the servants, the butlers, and the people who took care of the horses and the farmers and everything. They got together and they formed their own military unit. They were picked up by the British Army, and a year later, here they are in Gallipoli. Well, they were told to, okay, it's your turn to march forward into this, just nothing but machine gun fire coming at you. There's nothing you can do about it, and bombs and artillery. And people saw them marching as one into the smoke, but they never came out again. Never came out. Now, this isn't the chaos of battle. Things are going crazy all over the place, but they would stop fighting every once in a while, and both sides would let the others retrieve their wounded and their dead.
Sure.
And when they went out to look for these guys, none of them were there. They never found a body, and they never found any equipment. They had very back in those days, these kind of small military units had uniforms that you would recognize right away. Okay, they had their own style of uniforms back then, and none were ever found. And they couldn't have been all blown apart. There were dead people everywhere. But for whatever reason, they went into this cloud together, and wherever they went together because no one ever found any trace of them. At the end of the battle, the commander of the British Army said, we don't know what happened. Whatever happened is something beyond understanding, I think is his quote. But as you say, why hasn't this been looked into more? Well, these are 100 guys who died, and there were thousands of people who died in that battle. So it just kind of got lost in the history of it.
Yeah, well, that Gallipoli place, having visited it maybe 6 or 7 years ago, it is a haunting sort of an area. There's something about it that is causes you to pause and think, and it's not just like a military battlefield. I've been on a number of places around the U.S., Civil War battlefields and so forth. And I know that Gettysburg can seem actually quite haunted, and I know people who have had sightings of ghost things in Gettysburg. But this place, it just seemed very still and somber in a preternatural way, I guess I would say.
Well, I guess if there's ghosts anywhere, there's ghosts there because, just thousands of people lost their lives there, for no good reason because they just basically put everyone back in the ships and sailed away. So just one of those things that happens in war. Stupid.
Yes. So what's up next for you, Mack?
Wow, good question. I'm writing Wingman 19, that series we were talking about earlier. That's going to come out sometime early next year. I'm doing a military detective series called Starman, about a Navy detective who has just a little bit of ESP to help him solve his cases. And we do a radio show, Mack Maloney's Military X-Files show, not to be any competition to you.
Oh, no. We love other radio shows and podcasts, and you can mention it. There's no competition involved. There's room for all of us. We all have a slightly different slant on it, and no worries about advertising it. Be my guest.
Okay. We really look at the UFO situation and the paranormal, situation from a military point of view. And we have a lot of our guests, military or former military, or people who work for The intelligence agencies. There's no other way to put it. One of our co-hosts goes by the name of Commander Cobra. He did 4 tours of duty flying over Iraq. He's to this day involved in these kind of Defense Department programs. In fact, he did one show where he was flying a test program over the Gulf right off of Cape Cod, doing the show. So we actually had one of our co-hosts at 20,000 feet for a show. And so a lot of military kind of intelligence gathering, stuff like that. But we don't take it too seriously, but we try to get really good guests and try to get really good discussions about what the military does know and what it doesn't know, and how they react to certain things too is always really interesting.
Well, it sounds quite fascinating. And is it online? Is it or is it just at the time of the show?
No, I think we're in about eight networks. One of them, we're on the Dark Matter Network, KCOR in Vegas. We're syndicated by Radioactive Broadcasting, and they provide content to Armed Forces Radio. So, we're pretty spread out,
Good.
Yeah, but it's fun. We like doing it. It's interesting.
I had one other comment on your writing a book about a guy in the Navy who is into the paranormal, I assume, and this is just me speculating that you do know about the Navy remote viewing program.
Sure. Yeah, we've had guests on from time to time talking about that. That's another story that I don't think very many people realize that the U.S. military, supposedly it ended in the 90s. I don't believe it did, but they actually recruited people who had, higher ESP than, us regular folks. And these people were, basically given projects to look for Russian submarines, look for secret Russian ICBM bases, things of that nature. But what was interesting about it is they never used they used their information as backup. So a satellite might pick up a Russian submarine, at a certain coordinates or whatever. They would ask the people who, had the ESP capability, do you see anything? And they would actually back up the fact of what the satellite saw. So, they did some really unusual things. Yes. And it's just so odd that the U.S. military is paying for it, but the Russians did the same thing too.
Yes, they did. They did. And in fact, the U.S. government had several separate remote viewing projects. I'm most familiar with the Defense Intelligence Agency project that went on in the Army Air Force, but then there was a different one, and purportedly the Navy group didn't know what the Army group was doing, and vice versa. And we've had quite a few of those former government remote viewers on this show, on our podcast here. Simply because I've studied with some of them, and they're very interesting folks. In any case, I want to thank you so much for being on Shattered Reality Podcast, and I hope that you will come back again sometime with a new book. We don't usually do that much with fiction, but if you need one of your books, your fictional books mentioned, we'll be happy to mention your fictional books. But we will certainly interview you again when you write another fact-based book.
Okay, sounds good.
So thanks, Mack, and you take care now.
You too. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me on.
Bye now. Well, that was an interesting one. Mack Maloney, who has a series called Wingman, but he doesn't like to fly, so go figure that out. But he sounds like a great guy, somebody that we would like to meet. And he's written some very interesting books, the fictional as well as the non-fictional. And we are looking forward to this coming holiday season, where we're going to have a number of other wonderful guests coming our way. So please like us on Facebook, Shattered Reality Podcast. There's a Facebook page. There are 2 websites, shatteredrealitypodcast.com, shatteredrealitypodcast.wordpress.com. We are also featured on a number of other sites, including iTunes, YouTube, and Stitcher. And more are coming up every day. So click on us wherever you'd like to. Make comments on the site. And if you would like to recommend a guest, we do take our guest recommendations very seriously and do contact people. So, for myself and the currently absent Kate Valentine, I would like to say goodbye to you from Shattered Reality.